All right, everyone, welcome back to another ACFCS Emerging Risks series, where we look at some of the top issues in financial crime and compliance and talk to top thought leaders to share their knowledge and skills on how best to fight them. Today, we have a very special guest, Youngbee Dale. She's the CEO at Dale Consulting, LLC, based in Columbus, Ohio. She has more than 15 years of experience, and I think comes to fighting human trafficking in a very interesting way, because we always see so many big groups, FinCEN, whether U.S. Treasury, but a lot of different FIUs at the country level, banks, banking groups, the Egmont Group, others, Wolfsburg. They create a lot of red flags around human trafficking. Everywhere you look, red flags waving all over the place. But some of the most incredible details of how to fight human trafficking have come from banks doing some of their own detailed reviews and finding little nuggets that stand out. Something as simple as a transaction between 11 p.m. and 2 a.m. at a nail salon, at a massage parlor. That's a very powerful red flag that business could be tied to human trafficking. The same thing with credit card transactions. You might not think that someone reserving a hotel or car rental with a credit card and then showing up and deciding, oh, no, let me cancel that and pay with cash. Huge, blazing klaxon that this is something tied to human trafficking. And crazily enough, one of the things that seems so minor in the grand scheme of financial crime and transactions and red flags, credit card cancellations. Now, me and you, we lose our credit card once or twice a year, and that's it. We ask for another one. Someone who's tied to human trafficking, they're trying to obfuscate that financial trail. They'll cancel it 10, 11, 12 times in a year. That in itself is actually a huge red flag for human trafficking. But Dale, I'll go through a little bit of your bio here, and I really want to hear a little bit more about what you've done. But you've actually done quite a bit in the 15 years you've been in the space. You've authored several peer-reviewed studies on the commercial sex market in the US, including money laundering in the commercial sex market in the United States. And what I love, what you bring to the table, is you've actually looked at different groups and different kinds of models of human trafficking, getting the revenue, laundering the money, that are kind of tied to specific regions, which I think is incredibly helpful for financial crime compliance professionals. But you've also, with your expertise, you've trained in providing consulting services to entities in law enforcement, the NYPD, U.S. Attorney for the Eastern District Office of North Carolina, Georgia State Criminal Counsel. You've also done some expert witness work. Now, tell me a little bit, how did you get into this field?
Well, it was more like my calling. I guess I was like divine calling.
I feel the same way.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I'm Christian, so like, one thing led to another. I was working at a nonprofit abroad, and I was always interested in human rights issue. But I ended up somehow, because of my boss, needed someone to speak English and Korean. And
oh, wow.
At the time, we had a lot of Filipina sex trafficking victims, and I had no idea what sex trafficking was. But here I was, I helped them, serving them as a translator, because I was the only one who spoke English at the time in that office. So that was really the journey that I started. And then I happened to met, and when I went to grad school, also my professor was interested in trafficking, and I was more interested in financial crime at the time. And I had to write something about it to graduate. So okay, fine. How about we do money laundering and human trafficking? I don't know what I can find. I'll try, right? So I identified like 3 different major routes of global money laundering when it comes to the trafficking organizations. So that was my first journey. And then I was a journalist, and then I, met different people. And then I realized, well, there's a gap between the data I see in foreign languages as opposed to what I see reported in the American newspaper. So I spoke with 3 different experts in the field, and they told me like, well, I didn't know about that. They didn't speak foreign languages. So they said, I didn't know about this. I didn't know about, well, Korean. So I was like, you should write about it or something like that. So here I am. So that's been 15 years. Yeah.
No, and I like that, because you know, I get sometimes very like US centric because that's where I live, but you're right. There is kind of a duty on, you know, the thought leaders like yourself that can speak different languages to kind of see, okay, what is it out there in this language? What is out there in this language? Are there gaps between the two so that we can get this important information to as many groups in as many regions of the world as possible? That I can clearly see that's a passion of yours, and that as well is definitely a passion of mine. Because the more you know, the more you can spot, the more you know, the more you can do to be more effective in terms of fighting financial crime.
Right.
So you've analyzed how different trafficking groups in different regions use different models for generating illicit income. Tell me a little bit about that, kind of what you found and how that works.
So it's kind of, how long do you have today?
Well, it's scheduled for
All
20
the
to 30,
content.
but this is your show now. It's out of my control.
Okay. So just I started out with the analyzing all the U.S. commercial sexual exploitation cases that include the child porn, massage parlors, just regular sex trafficking, domestic minor sex trafficking most of the time, and then also just regular prostitution, escort services, whatever, and all the things that I gather from the cases that have been prosecuted actually. I identify, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, maybe 10 or 12 different types of business model. Now, when it comes to money laundering cases, I noticed that my paper only mentioned 8 or 9 or 10 out of 12-ish. That means that we're not looking at these brothels as an illicit business and going after their financial criminal activities. So, so really, that was my foundation, so to speak, to kind of uncover the whole holistic approach of uncovering market.
Wow. What are some examples, I guess, of some of the different models that you've seen? I guess you could either take it from the vantage point of the region, the type, like a brothel versus kind of other trafficking. Tell me some examples of these. I'm eager to hear them and share them.
I can give you, wait, I don't know, again, like I'm just thinking about it, just like I'm just overwhelmed. And
I lied to you. We're going to be on here for 5 hours. It's a 5-hour half-day seminar.
Yes, let me try.
Quick
so
hits,
let's see.
quick hits, Youngbee, quick hits.
So, okay, so, I realize a lot of people are interested in cryptocurrency, right? Bitcoin, people talk about, Zelle, PayPal, what's the other one? They talk about, what's that, Venmo, right?
Cash App or something like that, or all those different,
Cash App, yeah. So these particular payment methods are very popular among the organizations that, among the Western organizations. So in other words, those are more common among the more like high-class escort services that prostituting not Asian women, American descent, so Caucasian or Black. But if you look at the brothel models in the either Latino or even the Asian countries like Chinese, Koreans, or some of the South Asian countries, Cash App, Zelle, Venmo, these are not the tool that you'll find. So for anyone to say that that is really the method of human trafficking in general is not telling you the truth. So depending on the brothel model, depending on where the traffickers came from, their payment method is different than other types of brothels. So when you look at the, let's say Chinese brothel, like especially massage parlors, they're looking at really cash only, right? So massage parlors, as opposed to if you go into more of like a more expensive Chinese or Korean brothels, they'll use credit card. Maybe I don't think that these Zelle or Venmo are popular method. Credit card is more method. Credit card is more of a popular in conjunction utilizing different shell corporations. So that is one of the examples that I can tell you as a difference.
No, I like that because you're hitting on something that we have seen as well as a trend. And I like because now we're talking about the different sides of human trafficking because there's kind of like there's the supply and there's the demand side. And a lot of times we talk about kind of the supply side where, you know, these groups are getting these women to do different things in different ways in different places. And you talk about those red flags. But when it comes to payment, that's
Mhm.
also something that financial crime compliance professionals have to look at because we've seen, like, say, a human trafficker, he wants to advertise for services. So he'll get prepaid card. He'll swim different laundering methods together. He'll get a prepaid card, and then he'll buy Bitcoin from an exchange
Mhm.
with poor AML KYC duties. Then he'll
Mhm.
use that Bitcoin to buy advertising on, you know, like a prostitution site
Mhm.
or, you know, so basically he's trying to make it as hard as possible for any one group to put it together. And the only way that somebody could is if literally a crypto person, a bank person, a retailer, a prepaid card, if they're all working together to see the big picture. So to me, it's interesting that you're seeing kind of people who are paying for this, they'll use a credit card, but it's going to be from a shell company that has no real tie to them.
Right, right, right. So I think it's that's why it's important to look at the holistic approach of different types of business practice, so to speak, based on, you know, business culture, especially illicit culture. If you understand how, for instance, if you understand how to um, commit tax evasion or how to commit money laundering, you know, as a Korean brothel owner, as opposed to, you know, Latino brothel owner, you will understand what type of business tools and mechanism or investment method or even payment method are involved. And so it really goes back to the financial institutions or, you know, stakeholders in general needs to understand different types of brothel models and from the business perspective.
So let's, you'd mentioned the Korean and then Latino, and when we were kind of just literally just kind of meeting each other and talking about this, you had given some fantastic examples. But let's contrast and compare, say, one of those models and their differences. Like how would a Korean one do it as opposed to a Latino one? Because I think you had mentioned something where one has like a dedicated building and the money goes here. It's like a, you know, could be a business or a shell company owning this business, but the other one is more mobile. They're going around in cars, they're picking Airbnbs. It's
Mhm.
less stationary. Tell me a little bit about kind of compare and contrast with those two.
So within the Latino brothel models, I have found based on the cases that have been prosecuted in the United States, there are two different models. One is cantina, so that's pretty famous. A lot of people know about cantinas. The other model that are just as supposed to be famous is not as well known is a tenant single brothel. Okay, so cantina is a model. I'm sure everybody's aware that it's more of like a bar, so where you purchase commercial sex along with the juice, and then you purchase the services within that payment is combined with the juice prices, right? So that is, and then the prostitution or commercial sex happens either the room above the bar or right next to it. So as opposed to a single brothel works more like it looks more like a domestic minor sex trafficking operation, except these involve very different demographic and business models and business practice that are utilized by the Latino gangs or Latino trafficking organizations. So essentially, single models recruit women from Tanancingo or near Tanancingo, Mexico, where you know, using a lot of time they use a romantic relationship and then recruit these young women and bring them to the United States. And their hubs, you know, their hub have been the New York State or, you know, some of the southern states. But primarily method is that they'll drive these, they have a driver. They also have this person who is handing out the car to advertise for their practices. And they'll they reach out to these buyers, and these buyers are often, farm workers. Some of them are being trafficked through labor, and other, some of the brothels they utilize are the residential brothels near the, farmland. So these are the method that they use for tenant single brothels. So now with the tenant single brothel, because the services cost about like $35 US dollars, and they're primarily serving the Latino population, as opposed to I don't know if you find there are also Latino massage parlors that people don't pay attention to, but they also have different brothel models. But when it comes to movement, particularly, I found that to be true that based on the cases that I analyzed, that the tenant single brothel heavily rely on cash transaction, and they're moving the money to Mexico or any other Latino countries through the Western Union, as opposed to,
Wow.
yeah, as opposed to if you look into the Chinese brothel or even the domestic brothels, the escort services, or domestic massage parlors, or what's the other room salon, Korean room salon, chances are you're not gonna find a whole lot of transactions that involved in Western Union, as opposed to, payment method that we talked about, credit card, shell corporation, or any other methods that are popular in other side of the world.
So what are, see, that's really interesting to me, because that's one of the things I was wondering is I'm like, well, how do they get this money and how do they move it? Because technically for a lot of banks, Mexico is a very high risk country. And if you want to move money around the world, you only have a couple of options. Obviously, there's, banks and wire transfers, correspondent banking networks. You can move it anywhere you want. But then the banks will, you have to have an account. They're going to look at where you transact. They're going to ask questions. They're going to do a lot of anti-money laundering due diligence at the front end, transaction monitoring in the middle. And if you're higher risk, then you're going to get much more scrutiny. But that's the thing about, for, like MSBs and money remittance services, if you send money below a certain threshold, I think it's like $3,000, and some have voluntarily lowered the threshold to like $1,000. But if you do transactions that are like $500, $700, $50, they're not going to ask you for identifying information. Right. So if you have an army of different people putting money and sending it to different things, I think it's going to be very difficult for that particular remitter to put the pieces together. But I think that's kind of what they're trying to do in the first place.
Yeah. So I think that the reason why the Wells Fargo, Western Union is popular method for these Latino kind of single brothel is because the population itself really heavily utilize the Western Union. It doesn't have to be trafficking, but culturally speaking, I think the Western Union is a very popular method of transaction, as opposed to if you go to, if you're talking about the Asian brothels, for instance, some of them are, the Western Union is not a popular financial transaction method that they utilize. They have other avenues like, something similar to the transaction method that they use for the terrorism finance. What's it called? The name blanks, the term.
I'm thinking
Hawala.
Hawala. I knew you were, I almost said it before you did. I knew where you were going.
Yeah, so Hawala has been around for the longest time, since, thousands of years of their generation of the generation. So for the Asian brothels, the Asian criminals in general, Hawala is a very popular method that they utilize to move the money. So for them, there's no reason for them to utilize the services like Western Union. So this is why it's different depending on which type of brothel or which type of criminals that we're dealing with, that the compliance officer, even with the law enforcement investigators, has to be aware of, okay, who are we talking about and where is the money going?
See, I like that nuance, because a lot of people, they tend to just think that, one bad guy group, like that's the way they launder money. That's the way they do their thing. And we've done analyses on things, like it's called hybrid threat networks, but it's basically like a terror group that sells drugs and launders money, things like that. And they have a transactional DNA. that is
Mhm.
normally they try to construct it to evade major AML controls. But the fact that this transaction with this country and this business, like Hezbollah, doing stuff in the Middle East with used cars,
Mhm.
that is actually their transaction DNA. And a lot
Right.
of people think Hawala and they think Middle East. They think,
Mhm.
oh, this is the stuff that terror group, like you said, oh, the terror group uses this, or this money laundering group uses. No, this is the first time I've ever heard that kind of Hawaladars is also can be for Asian regions of the world as well, which I find very enlightening.
Yeah.
I guess I know we're technically probably getting close to time here, Young B, but I really wanted to at least talk about some of these models, and I really think that this is fodder for a webinar or something we should talk about at one of our upcoming events. So hopefully you're game for that as well, because we need a little bit more time to get into these details. Um, Now, you did a great contrast and comparison between kind of Latin and Mexico, and like maybe I think it was like Asian and Chinese. What are maybe one or two other models that you can contrast and compare? Because so far we have, a fixed business, a bar that is having people that are using the upstairs of the bar to do illicit acts in sex trafficking or nearby. We have groups that they're actually targeting. I thought a little nuance here that I picked up on. It's like different. The bad guys are literally making the most out of all these different ways to
Yeah.
generate illicit income against poor people that are already being victimized. So you have human trafficking groups, you have labor trafficking, and maybe you even have human smuggling, because you smuggle the people over. You're either having them engage in prostitution, you're having them engage in illicit labor, and then the little money they make, you're saying, go and do my prostitution services. Like, what a great little illicit ecosystem you have. That's
Yeah.
terrible, you bad
Yeah.
guys. So, but I just want to make sure everyone kind of catches how well thought out and detailed these illicit syndicates are, whether they're, organized crime, trafficking network, the laundering piece. Most of these groups, as we all know, I'm not saying anything new here, they operate like a Fortune 500 company. They literally have the group that brings in the money, the groups that makes the fake companies,
Yes.
and all these various ways to launder the money. And like I said, in every area you can think of. Now, think about what we just talked about today. One group using crypto, Western Union, banks behind shell companies, cash apps. That's kind of the new reality of financial crime that we're fighting. And I like, Young B, you said several things that kind of dinged in my head. Holistic, seeing the big picture, looking at the different kinds of models. And then with these new details and models, that's how you can tune your transaction monitoring system to better see these things. Because you're always going to me, as a financial crime fighter, you're always going to get more and better results out of more detailed inputs, more specific, practical models that are, to me, much better at catching things, what you want, than broad red flags that are all over the place.
Right.
But yeah, I guess, Youngby, just a few other models you would like to chat about or compare.
But then, I compare and contrast different types of brothel from the different region, right? So there are different types of um, the shell corporation practice that they use, depending on which types of brothel we're talking about. So let me compare. So let's say you see a lot of entertainment industry, such and such entertainment industries are the popular shell corporation name that are used by the domestic minor sex trafficking organizations in the United States, right? But then if you're utilizing that red flag, for instance, you're going to use that for Chinese or Korean or even Latino, some of the Latino group that also deals with drug trafficking. Chances are you're not going to find these names as a shell corporations to moving the money. A lot of time that when it comes to Korean or Chinese groups, really what you're going to find is some sort of trust, or they, when it comes to their moving the money through the real estate market, which I didn't mention in my paper, it just my paper. But so when it comes to moving let's say the massages, this is based on the cases that I worked on. So based on the cases that I worked on, that I can give you an example of a Chinese massage parlor, right? So for the Chinese massage parlor, same thing with the Koreans. So they're utilizing this money, and they need. It's not just when it comes to massage parlor, it's not just a one or two $35 or $500. They make a lot of money. So massage parlors make a lot of money because it's not just straight up sex trafficking business. They also utilize this sex trafficking business to practice loan sharking and
Oh,
illicit
wow.
gambling, and whatever they can do to make the most out of these women under
Hmm.
that bondage,
Hmm.
that's what they're gonna do. So these entities make a lot more money than domestic minor sex trafficking organizations or even some of the Latino brothels. Now, to be able to move that kind of money, you need little more than the Western Union. You need little more than Zelle. You need
Hmm.
little more than PayPal, right?
Hmm.
So what they're using the businesses, different heavy cash businesses like grocery market,
Hmm.
restaurants,
Oh.
or a wholesaler, right?
Hmm.
So these are the businesses that traditionally have been and popular, the businesses that have been used and facilitated the illicit transaction coming out of Korean or Chinese brothels. So now they're using these different entities to move the money, and then
Hmm.
they're investing in the real estate market.
Oh,
So as some
wow.
of them are going abroad, but a lot of them are staying in the United States and be invested in the different illicit practices or sometimes illicit practices. So if you want to look at these transactions, you're looking for these shell corporation called these nominal entities are very popular. And even if you're looking at the same massage parlor services that are listed on the roadmap, chances are you're not going to find a lot of nominal businesses under massage parlor owned by illicit parlor owned by domestic brothel, or as opposed to if you're looking at the Korean or Chinese, so you're going to find a lot of entities that are to function as a nominal owners. A lot of time they make about 20-30% of commission for being a nominal person for their real investor. And I've also had cases of private bank that were owned by a Korean criminal, and a lot of
Wow.
time, and it's legitimately registered under federal government. So when you look at trafficking organization, when you're looking at money laundering in the human trafficking, sex trafficking market, really, you need to be able to understand, like, okay, so where are they from? How are they functioning in the business? What are the business culture? So this is why it's important to understand, where they're from or how they're function or what their business culture is.
No, and there's a lot of details. I just want to make sure people heard here, and there's a nuance that I absolutely have to say. But you'd mentioned an actual website called Rub Maps. Now, just again, we're all adults here, but in financial crime and compliance, part of your duty is to do due diligence, and really regulators want you to see much broader than just what's happening in that account. There's a whole field called open source intelligence. And if this is a potentially higher risk business, massage parlor, nail salon in a region that is kind of known as massage parlor areas, things like that, you need to kind of look online and see, is this business actually mentioned on one of these sites that name and rank illicit massage parlors? Or are they, or is a woman there, or a number or an address tied to like a back page type site? So that you have to do this triangulation, and so that you can kind of properly risk rank. Now, what I find is difficult is but important to know, is that sometimes, obviously bad guys are very smart, but they're actually saying, okay, I know that if I name this a place, Happy Asian Massage, that's going to get a lot more scrutiny than Happy Asian Grocery Market, or Happy Asian Lending. So, and I like the fact that it's almost like a collection or a corporation of businesses, where you have your shell company that's a very seemingly low risk thing, But then under that umbrella, and who knows if that shell company, if the owners are real, if it's tied to some LLC in another country that has an impenetrable ownership structure, that's a discussion for a whole other can of worms we can't open up, but beneficial owners and how you can get at that information and in what countries. But I thought that was very interesting that they're on purpose choosing things that are seemingly low risk and then putting other higher risk entities tied to them. There's one follow-up question that I was curious, Youngbee, and then we'll kind of wrap it up here. But for an entity like that, like, oh, I have my, we'll say the supermarkets, an Asian supermarket, but there's illicit massages, illicit prostitution going on there, human trafficking. Where would it take place? Would it be like in that place, an adjacent business, an upstairs thing? I'm just curious the other, because obviously there's people going in shopping at this thing. So where's the illicit stuff happening?
So when I mentioned cash intensive businesses that I mentioned, restaurants or grocery markets, so they're not on the surface level, they're not closely tied, they're not tied to the massage parlor. So massage parlor is a separate entity, but if you look through their transaction record, or if you're looking through their shell corporation contacts, right? Some of them names are also listed in these businesses. Okay, so now the difference between domestic massage parlor or domestic trafficking organization as opposed to Asian massage parlors is that you have to understand this is a documented fact. So 75% of the Korean, at least Korean illicit brothels are operated by, no, 75% of the revenue of the organized criminals in South Korea come from brothel business, whether it's operating.
Wow.
So these people are very sophisticated. These are their bread and butter. You have to understand when you look at the domestic market, chances are you're gonna see, I don't know, let's say my name is, Mary, right? Mary's Massage, and then I'm listed on RumpMap. Chances are you're gonna find easily, my name is tied to my, my illicit business and also my properties, my transaction, that it'll be so easy to find my illicit activities. As opposed to Koreans or Chinese, you're not gonna be, let's say you find a grocery market, just track down this connection, right? But then the real owner will not be on the list. Most likely the real owner will be somewhere else. It'll be another broker or another agent who's running this business for the real owner.
A nominee or something that is no tie at first
right
place.
So there is no, also chances are the victims probably are not going to know these people who are running this facilitation, right? I call them facilitator because they're facilitating this real trafficker with the money laundering or even tax evasion purposes. So you're not going to be able to see on a surface level, you're not going to be able to see these two ties. But if you look at their business transaction record or even the financial transaction record, you're going to be able to see their connections, but probably under a different name.
So there's one last question, and I just want to give everyone a bit of context here. And again, like everything you're saying is so dead on the money, Youngbee, of things that I've learned. So a lot of people, they don't realize like of global money laundering, there's different numbers, people will beat me up if I say the wrong thing, but between like 500 million and 1 or 2 trillion, that's the amount of money that's laundered globally, generated from illicit income. Now, human trafficking piece of that, I think the last one I saw was like 4.5 billion, but it's billions of dollars. As a percentage, in some cases, the human trafficking is almost getting higher than the drug trafficking. So what Youngbee said for the Korean group, that 75% of their illicit income comes from Asian massage parlors or Asian prostitution, that is absolutely huge. So that's why this is so important to understand. More and more of this income is coming from humans, not just selling drugs and things like that. Right. I guess my last question, Youngbee, we've talked about a lot of how they're generating it, how they're kind of hiding connections. What about in terms of laundering the money? What are some of the, I guess, tactics that you've seen these groups launder the money, and maybe some ways that maybe a compliance officer might be able to pick that up in their system?
Again, it all depends on which group we're talking about. So we talking about Asian, or we talking about who are we talking
I
about?
guess let's pick Asian. Well, I know you're right. There's different models to make the money, different models to launder the money. So we'll pick
So
Asian.
let me put it this way. So when it comes to, like, just to be fair, right? So when you look at the escort services on the on the domestic minor sex trafficking escort services, you'll see this entertainment, but then you will see entertainment business, but then you will see these charges, credit card charges that are very round up, so that'd be like simplest the thing that you look for now. But if you look at the Latino brothel, especially when it comes to as a Western Union person, you will somebody, not the person who's sitting in the Western Union, but the person who's the not court clerk, the cashier person, the first person who is accounting. Most likely you will see the Latino victims who are sending money and often frequently sending money to the to their own home country. So you'll pay, those are the maybe red flags that you can pay attention upfront, and if they're wearing clothes that are really
Risque.
not appropriate. Yeah, so that'll be something that you will raise the as a red flag. So okay, this transaction seems to be little inappropriate or illicit. Now when it comes to Asian brothels, I don't know where to begin. So it takes a multi-layer of, there's so many different signs of tax evasion or money laundering signs. So it's hard to explain all of it, but it's a matter of how you're recognizing the connection and also business models. And I'll typically, more than anything, there's one particular entity that they utilize is the nonprofit.
Oh, okay.
Using nonprofit, and that's a known money laundering method, as opposed to setting up the 2000 shell corporation. They're using that as a tax evasion method. So that'd be something that you'll pay attention. You see the church address, but then you see Korean church that are tied to some residential address, but the residential address is worth 7 million or something, or even 700,000. That's way less than 7 million. But that's more of like you'll look at it as a sign of money laundering. And then you'll also look into their sales record. If you understand that, if you recognize the money laundering method using real estate market, then you'll be able to see, and then that's tied to somehow with a different individual tied to the illicit massage parlor, then there'll be definitely a sign of money laundering.
This has been so good. And everyone, we meant these to be like quick hit little interviews, but I had a feeling I would have too much fun with Youngbee here because this is such an important subject. We're both clearly passionate about it. But like what you just said right there, it's so like mind-boggling to me, because literally in the same sentence, and again, this just shows the creativity of the criminals, you have a nonprofit, you have maybe someone who's tied to a church, and then you have someone who's tied to real estate, and then that ties back to an illicit massage parlor. I would have never imagined thinking or looking at connections between these groups, because you have groups that are the highest of the high risk and the lowest of the low risk, all interconnected. So, I just want to say thank you, Youngbee. I really appreciate how gracious and warm you were to give me this time. I think it really helps people. And everyone, I hope you connect with her on LinkedIn. Please connect with her as well. She does consulting on these. Like I said, she helps law enforcement. She could help your institution kind of better understand these. And everyone, we hope to see you again soon at another ACFCS event or another emerging risks interview. Thanks so much, Youngbee.
Thank you.